Please stop clapping. I feel very uncomfortable. Hello and welcome to the Novara Media end of year / Christmas / general holiday winterval roundup of 2023. Thank you so much for braving the wind and the rain and South London to come here. It was distressing for me also crossing the river. So just to, describe the context a little bit of the year that's just been. For me, when I was trying to think about how I wanted to frame this event and what I wanted to ask this illustrious panel beside me, it feels that 2023 is a year where the position of the public and most people, their desires and their political priorities is really, really far away from where the elites are. Whereas in 2022, there was a degree of responsiveness, particularly around things like energy bills. Right now, it feels like the political classes, whether they're wearing a red rosette or a blue rosette, are quite happy to be like, yeah, get fucked. We don't really care what you think. And that's the case whether you're talking about the fact we've got crumbling infrastructure and neither party is willing to countenance a wealth tax, the fact that there is still a cost of living crisis and neither major party in Westminster wants to consider a rent cap or a rent freeze or some manner of rent controls. Or it might be the fact that Gaza continues to be bombarded and Labour refuses to join the Greens and the SNP in calling for a ceasefire. Now, if this was a New Statesman event, we would spend about an hour decrying the lack of nice things in politics and then the rest of the evening torpedoing any social movement dedicated to demanding nice things. But it's not that kind of event. Instead, there will be quality analysis from people who I'm proud to call my colleagues and my friends. So to my left, merely in seating and not politically, is Michael Walker. Michael, I'm sure you all know, is a host of Novara Live, and the thing I like most about him is his refusal to be dogmatic and doctrinaire, proper, heterodox, skeptical thinker. To Michael's left. Now I've got to think up compliments for everybody. To Michael's left, in every sense of the word, we have Moya Lothian-McLean. So Moya has been a newer hire for Novara Media, and I'm so excited by her work, which is a combination of reporting, cultural and political analysis. You will, of course, know her from hosting Novara Live, but I'm also very happy to say that she will be one half of a quality podcast, also hosted by me, which will be coming out very, very soon. And what's it called, Moya?
Pick up my mic. It's called If I Speak, in homage to Jose Mourinho.
Most of the podcast content will be defined by our favourite memes, so less quality analysis and more mediocre bants. And of course, last but not least, is Owen Jones. Owen, who has got a portrait aging in an attic somewhere, has looked like this.
It's Tony Blair.
He starts every day by opening Twitter, checking if he's still trending, and then drinking a cup of stem cells. Owen, of course, is a columnist for The Guardian, host of The Owen Jones Show, and a thorn in the side of every centrist dad. So, Owen, thank you so much. I mean, thank you for taking a break from boiling piss to join us here tonight.
From who?
Boiling piss.
Oh, boiling piss. Sorry, blimey. I really did not hear what she said.
Who's written an angry column about me now?
Yeah. I'm like, oh, more incoming. What's happened in the last...
That is one hell of a fight or flight response. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We are, of course, filming tonight. So if you have to make a discreet exit to go to the bar or use the loo or escape a frenemy, please do it avoiding the cameras. The second thing to be aware of is that we are in the middle of a fundraiser. So if you can find it in your hearts to go to novaramedia.com/support and to become one of our monthly supporters, that would be great. You'll be keeping Michael Walker in fleeces, which is all any of us can hope to achieve. So, topic numero uno is what's going on in Westminster. So, in case you have been mercifully in an induced coma for the past 12 months, let me just catch you up. Labour still have a comfortable 20-point lead over the Conservative Party, one which they are not wanting to disrupt too much by doing anything different from a historically unpopular Conservative party. Rishi Sunak, by some incredible shattering of the glass ceiling, has managed to poll worse than Liz Truss after she crashed the economy. And he's done that just by being uncharismatic and kind of needy looking. And I guess the really big questions, other than why is Rishi Sunak like that, the really big questions looking ahead to 2024 are: what might a Labour government be like? Will they shift left while in power or continue a slide rightwards? How did the Tories end up fucking it so badly? And is there any chance of them achieving a miraculous political recovery ahead of our next trip to the ballot box? But Michael, first question is for you. Look me in the eyes right now. Are you going to vote Labour in 2024?
Oh, me. It doesn't matter who I vote for because I live in North Hackney. But I probably won't unless they reinstate Diane Abbott because she would be my MP. But if I lived in a marginal, I probably would, you know.
Are you of the mind that any Labour government is better than a Tory government?
Oh, I'm that sort of classic swing voter. I'm in a mood for a change. I think it's time for a change, don't you think? Let's give the other guys a chance.
This is the Workington man himself. And I suppose the last thing on the topic of Labour, because I know that you follow this very, very closely, is looking at Keir Starmer's political trajectory since he became Labour leader in 2020. What do you think we can expect from him in government?
Probably failure. I think he doesn't seem to be particularly... I mean, everyone says he doesn't seem to be politically astute, but he is 25 points ahead in the polls, which, you know, does in a way speak for itself. I mean, he hasn't said anything that's made it seem like a Labour government is going to be particularly exciting. I think they'll probably build a few more houses than Conservatives because their backbenchers are a bit less YIMBY. I don't think they'll want migration to be a high salience issue, so they probably won't create intentional crises in the same way that the Tories have. And one would imagine that they would, you know, fund public services a smidgen more. But yeah, there's not much to be excited about, which, you know, they haven't tried to excite us. So I'm almost, I feel like it's not my project, and that's the reality. Sorry.
I mean, I love that you're like, it's not for me, babes. It's just not for me. Moya, in the dark wilderness years before you worked for Novara Media, you memorably coined the phrase, Keir Starmer is a wet wipe, which I know you're very proud of and love to be reminded of at every turn. What do you think a Keir Starmer government might hold? Any surprises?
I think there's two things here that I want to pick up on. Firstly, I don't think a Keir Starmer government will hold any positive surprises, given the trajectory that we've already looked at. But there's a secondary sort of pattern that we've been witnessing. One of the questions you started with was, how did the Tories fuck it so royally, which is how did they lose that, you know, the coalition they built in 2019, that's what we mean, right, when we say, why did they fuck it so royally? What happened to the sort of I think you put it as the redistributionist.
That is a word that I used in my briefing notes.
Yeah, populism, redistributionist populism of Boris Johnson. And I think that ties in. Why did they get rid of that policy so quickly? Firstly, because they never really abandoned austerity. They only did it when it was electorally popular. The leader was, you know, the person who was pushing this, and he won this 80-seat majority, so we're going to briefly pretend we're these populists, the redistributionist populists, but Rishi Sunak, who's now in charge, was always against that. He was always very like, here's a stranglehold on the economy. Boris Johnson was all about fantasy, right? He wasn't about details. He sold us this fantasy. It came crashing down the moment he rubbed up against any sort of situation that needed detailed governance, like the COVID pandemic. As soon as he needed to be in charge of the details, it all came round down his ears. And I think what Keir Starmer is really scared of now, and what he is confused about, is this idea that he's going to project a fantasy too, that anything he promises is fantasy, and that as soon as he gets into government, he's not going to be able to do it, and it's going to come crashing down. But what he's gone to the extreme in the other way, because he's confused the idea of fantasy and ambition. So he has absolutely no ambition, and anything that's like ambitious or is now described as radical, which isn't really radical, or is just like mild social democracy. He's like, that's fantasy. It's all fantasy. We're not a government of fantasy, not like Boris Johnson. We're not this government of, delusion like Rishi Sunak's Rwanda plan. We're going to be this government of pure pragmatism. And pragmatism has returned to the same ideological consensus, which is austerity. So I don't think we're going to get any positive surprises. I think we're going to get we're going to get a John Major-esque government, I think, personally, out of Rishi Sunak.
Can I just say, I didn't know there were briefing notes, which is why I'm speaking like a random guy in a focus group.
Those are my notes.
Michael never checks his email.
Some people are professionals,
he
Michael.
He never checks his email.
Oh, it was my Novara Media email.
Yeah, and
I don't check that one.
I also briefed you in person. I came into the studio and I gave you a hug and I said, this is what we're going to talk about.
I knew there were 4 topics.
And he was just there, popping Brazil nuts into his mouth, being like, yeah, sounds great. Sorry, that's a little bit of...
Ooh, topic 2 looks good. You can have your phone back out.
So, Owen, I know the obvious thing to do is ask you about the Labour Party, but actually I want to ask you about the Tories. What do you think the future holds for the Conservative Party? Because right now we're seeing this kind of right-wing rebellion brewing, where first Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick have had these high-profile departures from government so they can perhaps position themselves for a leadership contest. Where do you think the Conservative Party is going to go? Can the so-called centre hold, which is the sort of, technocrats of Rishi Sunak and David Cameron, or is it going to be the, Rwanda headbangers who take over?
Well, firstly, Rishi Sunak, by the way, I thought he's more... he's like a children's TV presenter whose career's sliding, or that guy from The In-Betweeners. He just sounds exactly like...
I've never watched The In-Betweeners.
Will?
Honestly.
Are you talking about Will? Are you talking about Briefcase?
I'm a geriatric millennial, so... the Tories. Well, firstly, I just think it's really important. I think any of the crises the Tories are in would have destroyed any other government on its own terms. Whether that be, obviously, Partygate, whether that be the cost of living crisis, whether that be the NHS collapsing. Liz Truss, obviously, I think just having 3 prime ministers in rapid succession is so ridiculous. But the reason that was such a big rupture is they tried to drive through economic policies which are toxic amongst the general public, and they then crashed the economy and had terrible effects amongst homeowners who are core Tory voters, as well as people...
Phenomenal girl bossing on her part.
I know.
Phenomenal.
We all miss Liz Truss and the memes. But she crashed the economy...
That was very geriatric millennial.
With right-wing...
I saw this really funny GIF on Liz Truss.
She did. Ash, I'm not joking, I stopped using GIFs just because Ash keeps bullying me on WhatsApp. It's really humiliating. So I just think after the Liz Truss experiment, people just zoned out. And in the sense of it doesn't matter what you do or say now, you're finished and we're not going to change our mind. So in a sense, that's my almost feel sorry for Rishi Sunak. And in the sense, there's nothing he could do to turn that around after that calamity. But in terms of what happens next, I think it's really interesting because I think there's some parallels with the US Republicans after George W. Bush. And our analysis of what happened then, because I think there was some people like this was a conventional centre-right party, and then it radicalised as though George W. Bush didn't unleash mass terror with the deaths of hundreds of thousands of, millions actually, if you look at some of the latest research on the war on terror of predominantly Muslims across the world and the horrors that unleashed as well. But after 2008, what happened to the Republicans is they became overwhelmed by this conspiratorial far-right extremism. And what happened is the Republican establishment, what they did is they fostered and nurtured it, and then they were eaten by it. So a good example is Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney, who is obviously the daughter of Dick Cheney, and she's cultivated this, she's the never-Trumper, sensible Republican. But in the early period of Obama, she was on TV giving credence to the birther conspiracy that Obama, didn't have a birth certificate, he was foreign, all the rest of it. So what happened is those sorts of people nurtured something which then ate them. And you could see that. I saw that at Tory conference, and they were starting going about 15-minute cities. It's like the most ludicrous thing I've ever... Like, why were they doing that? You know, it's just this whole conspiracy, this far-right conspiracy about 15-minute cities, which is this totalitarian attempt by where your whole life will be under surveillance and you will be told when you're allowed to go to the shops or not, when actually it's just about having local amenities close to you where you can walk or cycle. It's just a basic good idea. But they started nurturing that kind of thing. And they obviously didn't believe it, but what they're doing is trying to, in particular with the reform threat, is they're trying to kind of they think that if they give credence to that then that will stop reform being a major threat. But the story of this Tory government since 2010, what a ride it's been, is of Tory leaders giving red meat to the right flank of their party and the right flank getting both fatter and hungrier. So David Cameron obviously just kept giving them red meat and then he was eaten alive by them. Theresa May was then eaten alive by them. And Rishi Sunak in the same way. I mean, he's the most right-wing, I would say, conservative leader since Michael Howard. A lot of very, gullible centrist commentators felt just because of basically they're interested in vibes rather than substance. They thought he was somehow more one of them. But, he's more ideologically right-wing than, I forgot Liz Truss, but she wouldn't count, than Boris Johnson or Theresa May or David Cameron. And I think what's going to happen is when they lose the election is whether or not Suella Braverman makes it into the final two. If she does become leader. It depends basically on what the composition of the Tory parliamentary party is, because they are headed for a really terrible defeat. And so it depends, therefore, where, how many MPs they have and how many of them would let her go into the final two. But in any case, she's won the battle of ideas, because what will happen in that final two is the Tory candidate who is the most extreme and fanatical will win. And they will basically, the big thing if she's not in the final two will be who gets Suella Braverman's endorsement, so she will be seen as the kingmaker. So I think you might then think, well, they'll write themselves off and that'll be the end of the Conservatives. But I think that, will destabilise further British politics, because you'll have a Conservative Party which will indulge the most rampant extremism. The likes of GB News are whipping up that whole element of the right, that conspiratorial extreme far right. And I think, and also a lot of Democrats in America thought, well, if Trump takes over the Republicans, then that's kind of hilarious, but it also means we've got democratic hegemony. Whoops, the future of American democracy is now in serious question. I mean, the idea of an American civil war, who would rule that out now? 10 years ago, you'd seem like a lunatic.
To be fair, they've done it before.
Who?
American Civil War. I just listened to a podcast about it. That's why I'm talking about it.
I just had a terrible realisation that I always thought I was in favour of 15-minute cities, but it's going to be terrible for the podcast market. We're going to have to make Novara Live a lot shorter. That's one of our biggest markets, commuters, but we'll work it out.
So we're going to see Michael at an 15-minute city protest alongside Piers Corbyn and Tommy Robinson, being like it's an assault on our freedom.
It's going to be the next series of crash course against 15-minute cities.
I mean,
make commutes longer.
One really quick final question for you, Michael, is one about political leverage. So at the start of Keir Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party, the idea was, well, it's going to be a really close election, the next one. So he's going to need the left. There's going to have to be some kind of compact. And, we'll accept being a junior partner, both in the shadow cabinet and in terms of policy. Now, that incentive clearly doesn't exist. So what should the left do to establish some kind of leverage over Keir Starmer, other than going through his rubbish and trying to find compromising material?
Oh, it's a difficult question. I think at the next election, the left isn't going to have much leverage. He's very far ahead in the polls. The seats he's really sort of stressed about are not ones where I think the left will swing it. But I think that at the next election after that, they might do. And also there are certain elections where the left does have leverage. So I think Sadiq Khan is quite terrified of people voting to his left because they got rid of second preference voting, which I think was a terrible move for the Conservatives to do that. But it does mean that he is very worried about Greens getting votes and then the Tories getting through the middle. So there will be sort of pressure points across the country where the left can have influence. I think the next Westminster elections probably aren't one of those, but the ones after that will be. I suppose in a broader way, the way I kind of think about that is, when the Corbyn moment happened, a big problem was there weren't the institutions or the networks or the thinking to kind of make it work. And so in a way, I feel like we're kind of holding the fort until the next moment when sort of like the left really does have leverage. But apart from on particular issues and maybe the election one from now, I'm not sure how much leverage the left has.
Before we do move on to the next topic, there is something which I forgot to say, which is, can someone please keep an eye on the Tottenham-West Ham match for me and alert me to if there are any goals or any red cards?
1-0, Christian
Romero? Yeah. Fuck yes.
He plays for Tottenham.
He does.
Congratulations.
I'm so happy I've forgotten what the next topic is. Okay, AI. So 2023... to me, felt like the first year where politicians started taking AI seriously. At the beginning of the year, ChatGPT emerges, and I realised there's a much faster way to write my articles. And what was interesting to me is that despite this being a government that likes to talk the big talk about tech and being at the cutting edge of innovation, there is a real complacency when it comes to artificial intelligence. Just in April, Jeremy Hunt was saying that he doesn't buy the idea that millions of jobs might be at risk because of automation. Now, that isn't what his government's own research has to say, or indeed OpenAI's own CEO and then former CEO and then CEO again. Is he back? Yes. Sam Altman. What a dreadfully boring soap opera that was. Riveting. I watch EastEnders, thank you. Sam Altman said, well, look, it's customer service jobs which are first on the chopping block. Sundar Pichai, who's a Google executive, said the job losses give him sleepless nights. So what politicians are saying and what the industry is saying, wildly, wildly different. Moya, I want to start with you, because when we were chatting about this in the office, you were whatever the opposite fully automated luxury communism is. You are like, moderately analog,
Luddite.
Miserable Luddism.
Luddite with a phone addiction.
But you're really skeptical of the idea that AI might end up being a good thing for workers and a good thing for the left. Could you explain why?
I mean, I'm not Aaron Bastani, and he can make very good arguments about why it is a good thing for the left. And as we've talked about, Sam Altman's read Aaron's book, Fully Automated Luxury Communism. I think a lot of people in San Fran actually have. But I think so long as we exist within, capitalism, things like AI will always be captured by capitalist interests. And I think a good example of this is actually the OpenAI palaver itself, because what happened there was OpenAI is set up and it meant to be non-profit in some sense. It's obviously massive profit. It's a multi-billion-dollar company, but it's meant to be for human good. They have this board of people, these directors who look after the company, and they're chosen specifically to guide OpenAI towards good, so that it is for human good and not just for profit. And what happened with the firing of Sam Altman, who is primarily a venture capitalist? That's where he's made his money. He also has, he dropped out of a degree in computer science. He has the background, but he's not first and foremost doing the tech. He is the person getting the money. He is the face of OpenAI, and he's the one who's been going around lobbying with governments, being like, we're really good. Also, we hold all this power, so you better be nice to us and help us design your regulation. But he is like the venture capitalist guy. And this board were like, okay, OpenAI, we think we're getting too commercial. The chief scientist, Ilya Savetsky, said, we think we're getting too commercial, we're moving away from the mission we have, and then they fired Sam Altman. Okay, it was a kind of like mad move, whatever, but that was the main basis behind it. We're getting too commercial. And what did Silicon Valley do? Did they listen to the board? Did they go, actually, you know what? We hear your concerns. Maybe this is getting too commercialized. Maybe this isn't moving in the right direction. No, they went, you are going to reinstate this man because he makes us shitloads of money. Like, we're going to hire him at Microsoft and we're going to make your company have no value whatsoever. All you scientists, whatever. They basically bullied them through this thing like, this man is more valuable to us than your tech is to us. Like, we can replace all you scientists over and over again, but so long as we have the guy who makes his money, the guy that we've picked, our venture capitalist guy, like, we're happy. So they basically, it was like blackmail. They hired him at Microsoft, and then all the scientists were like, oh shit, we're going to be out of our jobs. The shares plummeted, all of that. And then they were like, we better bring him back. The board's gone now. This board of people chosen specifically to guide OpenAI towards this, humanizing good mission are gone. And they'll definitely be replaced by people who are more favorable to the commercial operation of OpenAI. And I think that shows very easily, like, you can have the best laid intentions. Doesn't matter. Capital will always out. The person who gets you the most money, the way the tech is utilized, for profit will always out.
I mean, Owen, Keynes was predicting that by now we'd all be working 15-hour working weeks. And I might do that because I'm skiving, but I don't think very many people are. So this sort of utopian idea that when you've got these technological advances, it's going to break down the wage relation and it's going to mean more freedom for workers, that doesn't happen. But also maybe this idea of this huge, raft of unemployed and unemployable people leaping up, maybe that doesn't happen either. So I guess my question for you is, what do you think AI will do to the project of building workers' power in workplaces? Will it radically alter it and therefore alter left-wing strategy? Or are we all making a big hullabaloo over nothing?
Well, I mean, Moya's spot on. Technological development always depends in terms of the outcome on the balance of class forces. And when John Maynard Keynes made that prediction, 15 hours by now, which has not been met, or even close, that was in the aftermath of lots of struggles throughout the 19th century and the early 20th century, where you got a significant and massive, actually, reduction in working hours and indeed the securing of the weekend and things like that. And that was, where you got the strong labour movements, which at great cost and sacrifice managed to reduce it, and they managed to, technological development aided that. If you look at the history of technological development, what normally happens is it destroys lots of jobs, but also creates lots of jobs. So if you look at the advent of the personal computer, that made lots of jobs redundant, but it also created allowed or facilitated the creation of lots of other jobs as well. The argument that's been made at the moment is, it might turn out that history will just repeat itself, that this time is different and that lots of millions of jobs are at risk, not just as was the case in the past where it would have been often industrial jobs, but also those jobs which are classed as middle-class professional jobs, like accountants, I suppose is a really good example, or, generic centrist commentators. Yeah, I mean, I think the argument we would make is if we had a stronger labour movement, then it would be about reducing the working week in the way that, and the working day, and making an argument about liberating humanity from the authoritarian imposition of wage labour. The danger is that, we see this at the moment, how technology is used in terms of things like surveillance, where technology places workers under constant surveillance, things like monitoring how often you go to the toilet and have a break, in call centres, that kind of thing. So that kind of really pernicious use of technology to oppress workers and to entrench the authoritarian nature of wage labour in modern Britain. But if we had a stronger labour movement, then what we would do is obviously harness AI in order to reduce, the 4-day week campaign at the moment is doing great stuff. And that whole campaign, that idea really is catching the imagination of lots of people. And that would be, to reduce the working week. The dangers with the AI at the moment is it will end up leaving lots of people without work, without any secure work, without offering any basic social security, because that social security has been ripped away. So we've got a big fight in our hands, because obviously we've got a crap Labour Party that's not going to do anything particularly good. So the danger is that in the next few years there'll be a Labour government where lots of jobs will be at risk, where they're not making the case for social security, and I think a big crisis could emerge from that. Because what will be interesting about it is this idea of the graduate without a future, where you get people who go, half of young people now go through university, they're indebted, and they often end up doing jobs they would have done without if they hadn't gone through university. But lots of now middle-class professionals may find themselves out of work as well. And historically, that can create a very politically unstable group of people, and it can go in lots of different directions. And that's the sort of group of people often quite right-wing extreme movements have often manipulated. So I think there is a danger there in that regard. And
before I come back to you, Moya, when I've spoken to you, Michael, you've often been a bit more optimistic about AI. I think you called me a Luddite once.
Well, I don't check my emails, so I'm not exactly a high-tech guy. I've got 2 different email accounts to check now, one from Novara and one personal, and that's just overwhelmed me. I struggle to check 2. But I'm not sure if I'm optimistic. I mean, I'm generally quite optimistic about sort of technological advancement and economic growth in general. I actually, though, on the AI stuff, take the existential threat stuff a bit more seriously than lots of the left. And I can see why...
So nuclear option kind of thing? What if they get the codes? What if
exactly.
the app gets the codes?
Well, what if we give them the codes?
Like in that
right?
Marvel film, where the app gets the codes, and then he's got to fight Iron Man?
Yeah, well... we might have to fight Iron Man. Or actually, who's on the good team?
I don't know. I didn't watch
God.
the film. Plugs for Marvel. No
I'm going to
plugs
try
for
and
Marvel.
ally with Iron Man. I don't know if that's a good thing to do. I'm hoping it is. Where was I? Yeah, I think the existential risk stuff is not necessarily ridiculous. I think that the cynicism about it is warranted because there's obviously a very high chance that climate change is going to kill a lot of people. But there's a very low chance it's going to kill everyone. And so I think Elon Musk and Sam Altman don't really care about it because it's going to kill people that aren't them. You know, people in sub-Saharan Africa or people in Bangladesh. And so they care a lot more about what they might call the 10% chance that AI kills all of us. So I think the fact that, you know, white guys in San Francisco are the people caring about existential risk is not coincidental because it is one of the few risks that might affect them. But just because I think there is some cynicism behind the concerns, I don't necessarily think the concern is ridiculous. Because especially if you look at it in terms of an arms race, so I mean, I think with Sam Altman, part of it was, the commercialization, but part of it was that he put on the board a few sort of people who were concerned about the existential risk that comes with AI. And they were concerned that he wasn't telling them everything he was doing. So they said, we can no longer trust you, and we think you might end humanity. So therefore, we're going to get rid of you. And then Microsoft was like, no, that doesn't make sense. So he's back. But then also you've got
Microsoft are like, we would like you to end humanity,
yeah, maybe.
please.
Well, it's only a 10% chance. But then there's also the competition between the United States and China, where you sort of have a similar dynamic to the nuclear arms race, where sort of like everyone admits, well, it'd be better if no one had nuclear. But if someone's going to get super advanced AI, it might as well be us. And then the difference between AI and nukes is, the one thing we could always do was control the nukes because we were smarter than the nukes. But the AI is going to be smarter than us. So I actually do think the existential risk stuff is serious. I'm not necessarily smart enough to understand exactly why, but I do take it seriously.
Moya.
The one thing I wanted to quickly add is, in terms of labour, with AI, we're already seeing how it can be a motivating factor in labour disputes. So you look at the Hollywood actors' strike and you look at the writers' strike. AI formed one of the central parts of that strike. It motivated, this strong organising. And the things that they have agreed are only going to hold for a couple of years and they're not comprehensive. But you saw mobilisation based around AI. So there is a preemptive concern there. We are seeing already people starting to act in a way, I don't know, maybe they wouldn't have 10, 20 years ago around something else, which is exciting. That's something to be optimistic about. And I feel we should try and be optimistic about some things.
That was really nice. Okay, so on to climate change. Before on to climate change, any updates on the match? Very quickly. All right. No more goals. Crucially, no red cards. Fantastic. So the climate crisis. This has been the hottest year on record, and I'm sure that next year will probably be the hottest year on record, and the one after that, the hottest year on record. This year, we've spent more time above a 1.5 degree average temperature increase than we have spent below it, which is very frightening for what that means in terms of climate tipping points and really how little time we have to avert ecological collapse. Against this, frankly, terrifying backdrop, what we have is a completely bananas political consensus in Westminster, where both the government and the opposition are watering down their climate plans. Rishi Sunak, because he's under pressure from his party's right flank, Keir Starmer, because who knows. And the way I wanted to, frame this question is that we've seen Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil do some quite impressive levels of mobilization. And their theory of change was if you get enough people out onto the streets, if you get enough people taking direct action and getting themselves arrested, that it creates a crisis of legitimacy for the state will be forced to respond by taking action on climate change. That hasn't been what we've been seeing. What we've seen are arrests, what we've seen are draconian anti-protest laws being introduced, much more hardcore sentencing of climate protesters, and the government and the opposition both watering down their climate commitments. I don't have anyone in particular I'm addressing this question to, so whoever wants to take it first. Do you think that we're seeing evidence that the Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil theory of change simply doesn't work, that the strategy is flawed?
Well, on Extinction Rebellion, look, I mean, I know there was quite interesting left critiques at the time in 2019, particularly kind of just, this argument of just saying people should have these confrontations which cause mass arrests, which was easy for often white activists to say, because obviously the different experiences.
I'm fine with white people getting arrested, by the way.
But I mean, it was just kind of like everyone needs to come and do this, and they didn't obviously take into account that has a differential impact on people. But what I'd say, I mean, if you look back at 2019, it was interesting because Extinction Rebellion in the polling was very unpopular. But what happened throughout 2019 is the polling showed consistently that public interest in climate went up and up and up and up and up. And that was to do with Extinction Rebellion. So it basically meant that even though often people found them irritating and annoying, it forced people to think about climate and the climate emergency. And I think that politicised a lot of people just because it forced a discussion, a debate. I mean, when I end up often, because Just Stop Oil, often when I do Good Morning Britain at some god earthly hour, but we'll often end up, they'll say, well, Just Stop Oil is one of their favourite things to just throw in, like something's happened last night, they've invaded some, like the Wimbledon or whatever, and they go, well, everyone's hates them, and I'm like, well, and then I'll just go on about the climate emergency and go, see, they've won. Because they forced the discussion on a TV show, and I don't think we should belittle that, because consciousness raising and forcing discussions about the climate emergency is a precondition to people organising and getting involved and mobilising. So I do think they've actually politicised a lot of people just by forcing it on the agenda, and I don't think it would have got those. We wouldn't have had those discussions without them. But the fact is, look, I mean, my view is, I'm sure a lot of people share this, which is under capitalism, and certainly the breed of capitalism we have now, it is not possible to resolve the climate emergency. So obviously we need a much broader movement that links together different struggles, with climate being the existential one, facing human existence. So in the sense, no, obviously Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion haven't created a mass revolutionary socialist movement to overthrow the form of capitalism we have. Then obviously they haven't succeeded, because I don't think we'll be able to tackle it in a way that I think prevents mass calamity. But they have made it a central issue, which the next generation, particularly a politicised younger generation, take as an article of faith. And I don't think particularly younger millennials and Gen Z would take the climate emergency as an article of faith were it not for the struggles of Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. And things like Greta Thunberg and those whole movements.
Moya.
I just want to say, I think their campaign of direct action actually has led to a revival of direct action with other struggles, and you're seeing that linked up. You saw Greta Thunberg, talking about Palestine the other day. You're seeing all these different forms of struggles within the workers' movement, within, say, Palestine, kind of actually start linking together in a way I haven't seen personally, or maybe I just haven't had my eyes open for a long time. And I think as well, just the idea of like sitting in a road, sitting in a station, locking yourself to something has come back in a big way. And I would tie that straight to Extinction Rebellion and then Just Stop Oil. Just Stop Oil, they have a single goal, which is they will stop their actions when the government stop funding fossil fuels and stop agreeing to fossil fuels as part of government policy. That hasn't happened. They're still locking themselves to things. They're doing exactly what they said. So they have neither failed nor succeeded. But I would say on the broader thing, yeah, they've done consciousness raising. I definitely think about the climate in a way that I didn't before. And I would say most of that is due to the direct action I see on the daily and the fact the conversation has been forced.
Michael, what do you think it would take for either an incoming Labour government or this Conservative government to actually have more ambitious climate commitments? I mean, Biden pushed through the Inflation Reduction Act, which was an incredible bit of legislation. You just name it something completely different and smuggle in all of this like green infrastructure funding. It's fucking sick. And yet there's little indication that that's going to be the direction of travel in this country. So what would it take, I guess, to force the issue for our political leadership? Or am I wrong? And is Keir Starmer actually a lot better on climate than I'm giving him credit for?
I'd say it's the one thing where we don't exactly know. You know, if there were going to be something positive, because people didn't really expect Biden to do that either, you know. So I'm not completely despondent when it comes to Keir Starmer and climate change. And that's partly because I don't really buy into the whole, you know, we'll have an incredible, disastrous climate catastrophe unless we overthrow capitalism. I think if that were the case, God, we're screwed. This is where I am more of a techno-optimist. I'm almost into geoengineering to some degree. I think probably
we paint every building white.
Well, I think we're going to at least have to brighten some clouds, which means you drop.
Does this make sense to anyone else?
Sounds like a Kate Bush song.
Yeah. So what you do is you drop very tiny water droplets, or you sort of push them up via shipping, and then that brightens the clouds over key regions such as the North Pole. And then that reflects heat back into the atmosphere, so that then the North Pole, what do we call it? The Arctic. I'd sound a bit more realistic if I was talking, not the North.
And then Santa comes out with his elves.
Yeah. Maybe he could do it while he's delivering presents. But no, I think geoengineering is going to be a very big thing very soon. And I do also think that, you know, I listen to David Wallace Wells a lot on this. So he wrote that sort of very catastrophizing book, Uninhabitable Earth, which was like very scary to read. And basically what he says is that the science is in line with him, but actually the politics has moved much faster than he expected. And his analysis, which I pretty much share, is that we are moving in the right direction. We're just not moving nearly fast enough. So it's a little bit as if, you know, COVID comes, everyone recognizes it's going to come. We say, oh, we might need a vaccine, we might need some lockdowns, but let's do it in 5 years' time. You know, so you're sort of, everyone kind of knows what we need to do, and it is possible, but there isn't the urgency that you need. So I suppose, that's what I think. It's how does one bring the urgency of COVID to the question of climate? And I think that's kind of what we're missing. And it does involve like a lot of investment in green energy. I don't necessarily think it involves the overthrow of capitalism.
I mean, how much do you buy the idea that we can have action on climate change, which does significantly arrest or inhibit or prevent ecological collapse with our patterns of consumption staying the same? And when I say we, I'm talking about the human species we. I know that like no one in this room has the carbon footprint of a billionaire, unless there's a billionaire in this room, in which case please donate to Novara Media. But I do sometimes think that there is the optimism of a Green New Deal, and the thing that it's trying to obscure is that the amount that I consume as a person in the global north, the amount that I buy, will have to significantly decrease because I'm gobbling up an unfair share of the carbon budget compared to, say, someone in Bangladesh or sub-Saharan Africa.
I don't know. I mean, we are decoupling growth from emissions. So it is the case that emissions are pretty much stabilized and growth is still continuing. I mean, the bigger issue is for the developing world, and I'm very much in favor of everyone in the world getting a bit rich. So I think the degrowth narrative, to me, isn't particularly persuasive. So what we've got to talk about is how do we, as quickly as possible, move to a system whereby we can all have very fabulous qualities of life without it destroying the planet and all of our lives.
Owen, you're the one who made the point that you've got to overthrow capitalism to get action on climate crisis. You're gonna have to rebut your friend over here.
No, I don't mean that. No, what I mean is the problem we face now is not that we're going to stop a climate disaster. That's going to happen. There will be disastrous consequences now, whatever we do. It's a lagging indicator. If we suddenly had net zero right now, we would still have disastrous consequences for a long time. The question is how big the catastrophe is that we face. And I think as things stand, if you look at the indicators, a lot of them are far worse than were predicted, often by very pessimistic climate scientists. That's the problem. And so when I talk about, getting rid of, it's not that we'll all die. I don't think that was ever a realistic possibility unless there was going to be the worst possible scenario, which is basically you have this constant positive feedback loop and you end up like Venus. I don't think that's likely, hopefully, but you could still end up with an unnecessary catastrophe which imperils the lives of millions of people. And I think that in itself is something that we have to fight against. And I think if you look now at the indicators and in terms of what the predictions are in terms of drought, famine, extreme weather events, then they are worse than often very pessimistic climate scientists thought even 5 years ago. So that's my view, and that's why I think you need, and we have to argue as the left for the most drastic measures possible, because this is a case of if it isn't quite as catastrophic as we thought it was, then at least we can build a society that fuses climate justice and economic justice, and we will all benefit from that. So no, I take your point. I don't think when we talk about the worst case scenario, we're actually talking about Armageddon and the end of human existence, but we are talking about large sections of the world becoming uninhabitable and that putting huge pressures on human civilization. And I don't think we should be clear about that. That's my view.
Any final comment, Walker?
That's why we should brighten the clouds.
And requisition the jets.
Requisition the jets and brighten the clouds. I don't know what you guys are talking about half the time. So for our final subject, I think that this was going to be completely unavoidable. The scale of the devastation in Gaza, I think, has taken everyone by surprise, even the most pessimistic people who've been keeping an eye on what's been going on in Palestine over the years. It's undeniable that Israel has significantly changed the facts on the ground, has carried out a program of ethnic cleansing in the north of Gaza, meaning that millions of people are stuck in the south of the Strip, unable to cross at Rafah into Egypt, unable to return to their homes in the north, and not even able to find safety, as the south is also under constant bombardment. At present, over 15,000 people, Palestinians, have been killed. Over 6,000 of those are children, and the number is likely to be much higher due to the near total collapse of Gaza's healthcare infrastructure. And I personally, having covered this story as part of Novara Live, having followed the news cycle over the past 2 months, there are lots of things that I've changed my mind about. Some of the ways in which I understood the conflict have changed. Some of the ways in which I've understood the Israeli state has changed. I thought that Israel would be a lot more inhibited by public opinion in Western nations. That's clearly not true. And so I guess in that spirit, Owen, I want to start with you. And I want to ask you if 2 things in particular have changed for you, because I was rereading your book, This Land, and there are 2 bits which I disagreed with, which for a whole book is pretty good going. But I suppose that it's when you were talking about how to characterize Israel. And at one point you say, the brutality of Israel's occupation is undeniable, but the situation was and is fundamentally different from those projects of European-style settler colonialism. And I believe the point that you're making is because they're not flying a flag of an imperial motherland back home, it's not European-style settler colonialism. I suppose the thing I want to ask you is, in light of everything that's happened in the last 2 months, do you still feel that the label of settler colonialism is inappropriate for Israel, or have you shifted a little on it?
No, I said it was a settler colonial state, but of a different type. And the reason I said that we had to engage, well, the point I was trying to make, because the problem with that chapter is it wasn't about the history of Palestine and Israel, it was about the history of the left's relationship. Because, uncomfortably for the left, when Israel was founded, the left supported the foundation of Israel and disregarded...
It was the one thing Soviet Russia and America both agreed on.
The first country on earth, whether we obviously just throw the Soviet Union to the international left at the time, the first country to recognise Israel de jure was the Soviet Union, which armed Israel, and the view of much of the left at the time, and it became a signature view of the left at the time, was often quite a racist view, which was this is a sea of Arab despotism, and this was a socialist project, and these are refugees who had fled a genocide, and therefore you should uncritically support the foundation of Israel. And the Labour left, people like, Tony Benn, as late as 1980, wrote in his diaries that he opposed the foundation of a Palestinian state because he opposed the PLO as terrorists. And, Eric Heffer, big stalwart of the left, you could see him when Neil Kinnock did his big speech in 1985 denouncing militant, and Eric Heffer famously walked off stage in protest, was a big left-wing Zionist. I mean, it was only after, particularly, the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, that the left shifted its relationship, and particularly as well the invasion of Lebanon in the 1980s, and the way that the Israel repudiated whatever you might think about its, socialist pretenses, but became an overtly neoliberal militarized state. But the point I was making is, the difference was, which obviously I haven't shifted my view on, is you had to engage with the fact that before the war, Zionism was a minority current amongst Jewish people, and in the aftermath of the Holocaust, it became a dominant one, and the collective trauma of the Jewish people is something we have to engage in. In terms of this, though, in terms of what's happened, look, obviously this is not about our emotional well-being, but I think this is the first time in my life it's just going through something where you just want to go and find a field somewhere and scream every day for an hour out of rage and grief. Me and Michael spent Tuesday night with this lovely guy called Ahmed Al-Nouk, who is co-founder of We Are Not Numbers, Palestinian journalist. 23 members of his family have been wiped out. He just texted me before we came on stage, and his close colleagues just been wiped out by an Israeli strike. 1% of Gaza's population has been wiped out in 7 weeks, the first 7 weeks. And the numbers, it's really important to say, the official numbers are underestimates. They don't include the people buried under rubble, thousands of them buried under rubble, who won't be identified for a very long time. And the history of warfare always suggests that the vast majority of people in war do not die because of the violent deaths. They die because of things like the collapse of public health care and the collapse of society. And it is extremely rare for a society to be so comprehensively dismantled and destroyed as Gaza has been in such a short space of time. I don't think there is really any modern precedence for what's happened to Gaza. And I think, look, my central view as we went into this was Israel as an apartheid state, which obviously practices settler colonialism, that we should support boycott, divestment and sanctions and so on. I think the reason this is such a salutary lesson, it's not like I'm shocked. I'm maybe shocked, but not surprised. Because, for example, I have no illusions of the British media. I've worked there for 12 years. And I've got the grey hairs here to show it. But I knew it was a racist industry, but the open display of anti-Palestinian racism, there isn't even a pretense that Palestinian life has any meaning or worth. I mean, they might as well just come out and say, we don't think Palestinian life has any meaning or worth whatsoever. And I think that level of just outright racism is something which, if I'm boiling with rage, the consequences of that for those in the Middle East and elsewhere, and people in the minorities in the West, those consequences are going to be felt for a very long time. I do think a really interesting thing Naomi Klein said, just in terms of your point you were making, a few weeks ago I saw an interview, and she talked about how, in a sense, it was almost like the Western imperialism accepted the establishment of Israel as a form of reparations to Jewish people, where where there was almost like an opt-out with Israel, whereas the global north was forced into retreat with colonialism and imperialism because of the struggle of those colonized people, that Israel would be given an opt-out and allowed to continue to practice those as reparations for what the Europeans did to the Jewish population. And I think you can partly see that being played out in horrendous real time. I think the reason, what's really cemented my view about boycott, divestment and sanctions, I actually interviewed, we're talking about AI, I interviewed a brilliant investigative journalist for 972 Mag, who went through the war machine, the Israeli war machine. He got leaks about how it works in practical terms, about the calculations made. Now, it used to be dozens of civilian casualties per military target. Now it's hundreds of civilians. That he said, if a 3-year-old girl dies in a house, it's because someone knew that was going to happen and they decided it was an acceptable cost, that kind of thing. But he said, he said, look, the fact is, in Israeli society, the polling shows that 65% of Israeli Jews think that the Israeli military isn't bombing enough. There isn't enough firepower being exacted. And the point he made, and the Israeli peace movement, as battled as they are now, are more courageous than ever, is that we desperately, desperately need now a much stronger movement across the world to put huge pressure, and that means a much stronger boycott, divestment, and sanctions regime. Because we are seeing now, I do think we need to talk, obviously, about the language of genocide. I interviewed Raz Sigal, an Israeli American professor of genocide and Holocaust studies, and the very clear point he said to me is it's very rare for intent to be so overt. It's not subtle. When you get Benjamin Netanyahu calling Amalek in the Bible, in which the Amalek nation attacks the Israelites, and God says to the Israelites, go and kill all men, women, children, and livestock, where you get the finance minister saying the West Bank's full of 2 million Nazis, where you get turn Gaza into a city of tents. That would, it's damage, not accuracy. It's so overt, the language. No innocence in Gaza, said Avigdor Lieberman, the former foreign minister, still very influential in Likud. It's genocidal in its intent, and there's nothing stopping them. There's no pressure from any Western government, despite occasional flailing around. So it just shows all it's cemented for me is, unless we build now the strongest possible movement around boycott, divestment, and sanctions across the world, we are going to see the elimination of the Palestinian people through violent means and ethnic cleansing. And, we're running out of time, and we just need to build that movement. That's what I've become, that's my stronger view than ever.
Michael, within Novara Media, I'd probably say that you're one of the people that's followed the story the closest, probably because you host most often for Novara Live, so you've been paying attention to the news cycle on a day-by-day, very granular basis. Over the past 2 months and putting together everything before that as well, if you had to suggest or predict the most likely endgame outcome in Gaza, how would you characterise it?
I suppose in terms of most likely end game, it's going to be some variance. So what the Israelis wanted to do on October the 8th, what they wanted to do for a long time, but what they thought they had the opportunity to do on October the 8th was clear out Gaza. They wanted Gazans to be put into the Sinai, and they still are sort of touring TV studios saying, what if every country in the world took 10,000 Gazans? That would empty Gaza. So that is their plan. And I think they still have that in the back of their minds as a possibility. So every time they sort of make the humanitarian crisis worse and bomb more and more parts of Gaza, I think that's in the back of their mind. Well, one possibility is that life gets so miserable and they have a riot on the Rafah crossing, and then the international community has to step in and say, look, Egypt, I know you don't want these people, but you're going to have to open that border and we're going to give you shed loads of money. So I think they are trying to force the hand of the international community to make that happen. By the way, the reason the Americans aren't particularly keen on that is because Egypt has an incredibly weak state and a very unpopular dictator, and his main opposition is the Muslim Brotherhood, who are to some degree allied with Hamas. So the Americans here aren't so much motivated by, you will probably know this, but they're not so motivated by sort of like their humanitarian concern, but they think if all the Gazans move to Egypt, then the Sisi regime could collapse, and then they can't predict what will happen next. They quite like Sisi because even though he's a terrible leader...
Yeah, they supported a coup against the Muslim Brotherhood once in the last decade. They don't want to do it again.
They don't want to have to do it again. It took too much of that. Took too much bandwidth. So they preferred to keep that one off the table.
Is that a tech term, Michael?
So I use that phrase all the time, actually. I like it. But anyway, what's going to happen, I'm not sure. That's the Israeli end goal. The Americans, I think, have recognised that can't happen. And so there is some sort of stalemate which doesn't really make any sense to anyone. Like at the end state, I don't think anyone's really chosen one that seems to make much sense. I think what the Americans want to happen is you have Hamas removed by military means, then the people can sort of go back to their cities and rebuild them, but this will all be under the auspices of some either international body or the Palestinian Authority, which the Israelis don't want. The problem with that is that it's not going to be particularly acceptable for the people of Gaza. And also, even if it began as acceptable for the people of Gaza, say for the majority of the people of Gaza, there would still be a significant minority who want to start a war with Israel for obvious reasons. And then you would have to have a type of governance which is so authoritarian because you're so desperate to stop anyone fighting. Because the moment any Gazans fight Israel again, they're going to bomb again. So the only option is to have an authoritarian government after this, which is way more authoritarian than Hamas, because they will be tasked at the threat of complete destruction with making sure there is no resistance to Israeli rule.
Moya, before we move on to the Q&A, and I know this is a big question, but I will encourage you to answer it very quickly. One of the things that we've talked a lot about together since you started working for Novara Media especially is about the role of identity politics, the primacy of subjective feelings, and that as minoritized people, we kind of get to say, well, my lived experience is this, therefore it is a political reality. And one of the ways in which we're seeing that play out now is around the idea that certain expressions of Palestinian solidarity, whether it's a Palestinian flag or a slogan like "From the River to the Sea," these things are anti-Semitic, or enough people feel that they're anti-Semitic that we shouldn't use them. One, I guess, where do you stand on that, and how do you engage with those feelings? And two, does this sort of expose the inherent weakness of liberal identity politics, that actually sometimes lived experience isn't the same as political reality, and sometimes you got to push back?
One, I don't engage with it because it's bollocks and we've entertained it for too long. 17,000 people are dead. I think 1.8 million displaced. I'm not engaging with that. Two, yeah, of course it shows the limit of liberal identity politics. What I will say about the situation in Palestine is, again, like Just Stop Oil, we are seeing a more cohesive political response to it from the workers, from the labour movements, because our politicians are not just being useless, they're actively complicit in a genocide. Their cowardice they have blood all over their hands and it won't wash off. But what we are seeing from grassroots is a joining up again of movements, of solidarity struggles, even a reawakening of international solidarity struggles that I don't think, again, we've seen on this level for a long time. And I'll give you an example. Today, across the UK, there were 4 different pickets, right? Pickets of arm factories. I think there was one in Dorset, there was one in Brighton, there was one, I want to say, in Glasgow. Does anyone know where the 4th was?
It was Lancashire.
Lancashire. But these pickets didn't just happen in the UK. They also happened in the Netherlands, they happened in France, and they happened in another country that I can't remember. And I want to say Portugal, but if anyone knows, put their hand up. And that right there, that is cohesive international struggle. We've been seeing this time and time again. We've been seeing, people on jet skis in Australia blockading. Jet skis are fucking sick. We've seen people tying themselves to ports. We are seeing this action from workers. And there was in anti-apartheid movements, there was a very clear involvement of trade unions. There was a very clear, international struggles. These actions have happened because Palestinian trade unions have said, we need you to stand in solidarity and do practical stuff. So, yes, we're seeing the limit of liberal identity politics. It's very hard not to see the limit of liberal identity politics when people are like, oh, this chant about liberation is anti-Semitic. And it's like, are you seeing what's happening on the ground? Are you seeing what's happening right now? This is not washing as a way to try and tamp down the struggle for liberation, the struggle for resistance on behalf of Palestinian people. But on the flip side, the side where I'm like, yes, this is an opportunity to keep mobilizing. This is where we should be putting our energy. Stop focusing on what they're saying about our slogans. Get out there on the picket lines, because that's where it's actually happening. That's where the solidarity movement is reigniting.
We are now moving towards our Q&A, and my lovely colleague with the mic, who's got the mic, India over there, crouched down like a little hobbit, will be finding you, whether you want her to or not, so she can take some of your questions. Now, they have to be real questions. They can't be comments. And if you say this is more of a comment than a question, you have to give me personally £20. Okay, so I'm going to take questions in rounds of 3. So we've got beanie hat and gilet. We've got blue shirt, dark sweatshirt, and can we have someone who's not a man? That would be really lovely. I know. But there we go. We've got another hat. Right there. So we've got gilet, we've got sweatshirt, and we've got a burglar with a dark hat.
Do you want me to stand up or say it? Or?
Just say it.
Just say it. Okay. Can I ask 2 questions?
You can ask 1 question.
Okay, so just regarding the Starmer scenario, I am a Labour Party member still for my sins, boo, yes. But Miata, my MP is Miata Fanbule. She's replacing Harriet Harman. She seems kind of sound, but I just wanted to put a possible scenario to the panel, right? So the economic consensus has shifted a bit, right, from the austerity years. Even the IMF agrees, right? Everyone knows you need investment to spur growth. Capitalism operates best with a kind of coordinated market strategy. This is why the GDP of Germany is $1 trillion more than the UK, I mean, among many reasons. I've been told Keir Starmer doesn't understand economics, and I believe that, but others in Labour do, probably. So if his aim is to grow the economy, why would he continue austerity? Why would he not actually sort of take this Machiavellian strategy to its end and actually do something, possibly vaguely social democratic? It's a bit of a devil's advocate.
We've got, will Keir Starmer do a big old, I guess the opposite of a villain reveal, where he actually does something good? We've got Burglar with a question. Sorry, I should stop calling you a burglar, but it's because you've got the black beanie hat that reminds me of Burglar Bill. Right there in the middle. Sorry. Oh, yeah, we go. Sorry.
Hi, thanks guys. Really good to see you all. It's weird to see you in person, not on my phone. But okay, so without trying to get into conspiracies, okay, so in 2016, the UN Conference on Trade and Development said that off the coast of Gaza, there were roughly 122 trillion cubic feet of oil and gas, okay? Potentially, sorry, yeah. So there's a lot of, anyway, in the ground, there's a lot of oil or gas, whatever. So to your point, Moya...
Fossil fuels, baby.
Yeah, like prehistoric bugs, whatever. So as you said more earlier, like the total uniformity in the entire West, like complete support of Israel, right? So to what extent does the total unity for Israeli support from Europe and the US come from the potential exploitation of said resources off the coast? And then secondly, Benjamin Netanyahu at the UN in September 2023 of 2023 drew a line, which he loves doing at the UN with a big like board. He drew a line for a new oil and gas pipeline through Israel from the UAE after the Abraham Accords were signed. So obviously with the destruction of the Nord Stream oil pipeline, likely by Ukrainians, supported by the US, to what extent do you think that uniform support comes from the potential for a new oil and gas pipeline connecting the Gulf states to Europe? Hopefully that made sense. It wasn't too mumbled, but...
I maintain the Nord Stream pipeline blew itself up.
Allegedly, yeah. Sorry, I hope that made sense. So,
gas is flammable, isn't it?
We're all trying to find the guy who did
The deep questions here, is gas flammable?
And, okay, Burglar Bill, finally.
Yeah, I'm
so
here.
sorry.
Hi. I'm just going to keep mine pretty short. I think one of the biggest villains for me this year was Suella. I just cannot believe some of the shit that came out of her mouth. I want to know from each of the panelists, is she a robot who is incapable of having any shred of empathy for anybody other than herself, or is she just an edgelord who loves the attention?
All right, so maybe, Owen, I'm going to ask you to respond to the Keir Starmer opposite of a supervillain moment.
No. No. He's not good. I wrote my column about that, so today, which is going to come out tomorrow, so that's good. I've prepared.
It's actually your editor who's in the audience planting a question.
No, I think there's a chunk of people, aren't there, who are kind of, the Starmer loyalists of a description, all the kind of ultimate Labour loyalists who think that he's just playing this clever game and he's doing it in order to navigate the right-wing media, and actually he'll be really ambitious and politically progressive in a way that he's not shown in power, in opposition. And I think there's various reasons that's not going to happen. One of them is the people around them, who I've met lots of times over my adult life, and they are just ideologically, they're obnoxious people. They're like Gareth from The Office, but less charismatic. But as well as that...
I've also never watched The Office.
That's too much, Ash. Come on. You just... No. They're just ideologically opposed to things like progressive taxation, public ownership, tuition fees. Tony Blair, do you remember he said in 2015, he said even if a left-wing Labour Party was electable, which he thought it wasn't, he wouldn't think it would be a good thing if it was. So that's their mentality. The problem is actually that, the difference between them and the New Labour founders is they were, whatever I think of New Labour, they were substantial figures as well, like Alistair Campbell, Peter Mandelson, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair. Like, they were substantial figures. These people aren't. They're actually quite mediocre. They don't have an intellectual hinterland. New Labour came out of this journal partly called Marxism Today, which was the internal organ for a long time of the Communist Party. It went through this Euro-communist turn, and it went on about how the economy had changed, that we didn't have this Fordist model of production, and then they just went on, and they ended up in a kind of New Labour position. But these people don't have any intellectual foundations for what they're doing at all. They're often motivated by spite, ideological spite. They will define themselves against the left. Basically, they will come up with ideas just to annoy left-wing people. I genuinely think that is a perfectly reasonable way of describing how they work. And I think what you've seen ever since he became leader and lied through his teeth in order to become leader is he's just shifted to the ever more, they've watered down their £28 billion a year thing. They've constantly watering down their proposals. And the danger they've now got is because they've ruled out increasing taxes on the rich, the Tories have baked in austerity in terms of what happens after 2025. They're going to end up in a big crisis because they're going to raise expectations just by getting rid of the Conservatives, but there's no basis for them increasing funding in public services. They're throwing everything at growth, but they've not offered a different economic model like tax and spend. So I think he's going to be very unpopular within 2 years when people's living standards don't substantially increase, when public spending doesn't increase, and all the various overlapping crises have got worse. So no, he's going to be a shit show.
Before I come to you, Moya, Michael, you have a response to this as well. Also, I do want you to answer, is Suella Braverman a robot?
Yeah, well, I think Owen's thing is plausible, but in a way that might lead into the question, right, which is to say that even if Keir Starmer and everyone around him is an arsehole, they need to get elected a second time, and to get elected a second time, they need to bring about some growth, and maybe to bring about some growth, they might realise that they have to invest a bit more in the economy. I mean, the worry. Well, I mean, there are a lot of worrying things, aren't there, with Keir Starmer? But the thing that means that's not possible is their fiscal rules, and it's not so much that the fiscal rule about we will only borrow for capital spending, we won't borrow for current spending, so we'll only borrow for investing in big stuff, not paying people's wages. That's not the big problem. The big problem is they've said that debt as a proportion of GDP will have to fall within the first parliament, which does actually mean you can't really borrow any money. The upside, though, is Keir Starmer's lies a lot. So hopefully he will break the fiscal rule just as he broke his 10 pledges.
Yeah, and on that, he doesn't really have any strong politics. He's not an ideological true believer like Tony Blair. And I think you will have, unlike the 90s, we have a stronger Labour movement that's resurgent, and more politicised younger generations. And I think he also panics under pressure. And I think if we build up strong enough movements, then I think maybe we will get.
But Suella Braverman a robot? Yes? No?
She's a very strange individual. But in a way that's, I feel like I kind of get her, She's just so
What is
weird.
it about a short South Asian megalomaniac that's so familiar to you, Michael?
They've just got a certain charm.
It's like she's going through like a checklist of cliches, though. Do you know what I mean? It's like she's not really in it. She's just like, how would you go through like my kind of? It's very she's very contrived.
I think she grew up always feeling like a loser and has tried to reinvent herself as someone who can gain power and dominance because of that, and she will never make up for the void.
Ooh, very good.
That sent shivers down my spine. Moya, you really wanted to respond to the question about Gaza and the gas off the coast of Gaza.
Navy sweatshirt, blue shirt. I'm so glad you asked this. I don't think it is the primary factor. First of all, it is gas, primarily, that is just off Gaza's coast. It is a Gaza gas field. And we did a very good interview about this the other week that we've put up as an individual segment with climate journalist Rachel Donald, which I recommend you to watch.
Are you plugging content right now?
Hell yes. What else? This is content,
Shameless.
baby. Content within content. This is Inception. So this Gaza gas field, it's basically been primed to be mined since 1999. I'm sure you know this as you asked this question like in the first place. And it never got developed. It never got developed because of the various tensions that are going on in the region, because Israel kept blocking that development. It would bring in, several million a year for Gaza itself. But it's not the primary factor. There are way more ideological factors going on there. What you are seeing with the Gaza gas field is it's a boost. It's an extra. So Israel already have this massive, even bigger gas field down by Haifa, which is this called the Leviathan gas field. And the reason that gas is becoming more of a player is because gas is, as Rachel explained, a transitional fossil fuel. So we've run out of oil, like we're getting into the slate shit now. But gas, we still have a couple hundred years left, maybe 125 years. That's not good, by the way. This is not a good thing. But for the governments around the world, particularly the West, who are clinging on to every little bit of fossil fuels that are left in that ground and they're going to wring it dry, this is a good thing. They're like, great, you've got 100 years, let's mine that. So because of the sanctions on Russia, because of, we can't get gas from Russia anymore, above ground.
Because the pipeline blew up by itself.
Because the pipeline blew up by itself. There is a search for, these new gas fields. The Gaza gas field isn't like a massive one. It sounds like a lot, like 1.2 trillion, but it's in the grand scheme of things, it's not actually that big. And it would be a great bonus if Israel got their hands on it. They would enjoy that. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely going to be a motivating factor, but it's not the only factor. And one thing we're also seeing is, you talked about the Americans not having an idea of where they're going to go next, how Gaza's going to rebuild itself. They've brought this gas field into play by saying, well, in Gaza's reconstruction, we'll just get the money from the gas field, and that will pay for Gaza to be reconstructed. Israel's never going to fucking allow that. Not with the current state of play, but that is something we're seeing them talk about. So they've already said, basically, hands off that gas field. You're not getting it right now because we're going to use that to pay for Gaza's reconstruction, which is the only bit of kind of reconstructive policy we've seen suggested really from America. But yeah, so that's the kind of summation of the gas. It's important. It's a bonus. It's not the main factor.
I'm going to take 3 more hands from this side. Okay, we've got right at the back by the Christmas tree. We've got right at the front here. And we've got right at the side with wearing a grey top. Grey top at the side.
I'm quite active in Just Stop Oil. And I was very sad that the world transformed, that the format, I feel, didn't allow for a lot of clarification. And I think a lot of what Roger said, could it be explained, Roger Hallam, a lot of what he said, I think, could it be explained in detail, and there was a lot of miscommunication, I feel. And that made me sad, because I love Novara Media, and I also love Just Stop Oil. And by the way...
We won't make you choose.
And by the way, I do community there, and I would love to make events like this with you guys at some point, just plugging that in. But my question is, I feel like there's some stuff we do well, which is disruption. And, the last campaign we had about 600 people on the street, and, the police was complaining that, they were overwhelmed, and although they can't really strike, I think, we would push them into quitting or just putting pressure on them. And I was feeling maybe, because we're struggling to gather the left as all the Corbyn left basically in this country alongside JSO. Maybe we could do slow marches for the rent crisis or the cost of living crisis. And I would just, wanted to ask you your opinion on that, if you think that kind of mobilization would work or not.
All right, so should Just Stop Oil expand its slow march strategy to other left-wing causes, for instance, for rent controls? Let's go Gilets jaunes. That is what Moya said. We have got prom date in the corner. There you go.
Hey, good evening, guys. It's so lovely to be here and see you guys, because I watch you guys pretty much every single day, so thank you for doing this. My question might be a bit more philosophical, perhaps, and it's more around, I guess, the left versus the right in some ways, because I used to, consider myself as a leftist, and maybe still do to an extent, but I think the lines have slowly become a little bit more blurred, especially over the last few years when, I've seen a lot of stuff around cancel culture, particularly coming from the left, and the right in some ways being the one advocating for freedom of speech, although when it goes against them, then they're the first ones to cancel it anyways. But it felt like when you question things, let's say around, not the efficacy, let's say, of the vaccine itself, but what were the financial interests behind it, or when you question stuff around lockdown, you automatically get labeled as a conspiracy theorist from all sides. Or, for example, if you question or try try to debate anything from a gender perspective, then again you enter the slope where you just cancelled immediately, or you can't really speak about lots of stuff on university campuses, which used to be this really space where you could just debate about anything, but now they've just become these massively safe spaces. And I don't quite know, like, what is the left? Because when I look at you guys from Novara, or Owen yourself, for example, that left comes across as a lot more open-minded, a lot better version compared to what you see elsewhere. So what is this left now? And also, when it comes to the Israel sort of Palestine issue, why has that largely become such a left versus right issue? Because I would have thought it would straddle across sort of that whole spectrum, but when you really look at your commentators and stuff, the left seem to be very much pro-Palestine and the right anti, and I can't quite point my finger to why that is the case.
That's 2 questions, but I'll accept it.
No, it's part A and B.
That's 2 questions. My only job is to count questions, and that's 2 questions, but I'll accept it. And we've got right at the front.
Hi, yeah, really great to be here. Thank you. It's really exciting to see you all in person. I thought the points you were making earlier about AI was quite interesting in the sense of it being this kind of open, good for the world sort of thing that then gets a bit throttled by capital and potential to make money. Do you think there's a risk that the same thing could happen with the transition to kind of green energy and fuels? We get told a lot that green energy is something that is a lot cheaper inherently. It could lower all our gas bills and things. With big oil companies fundamentally running out of fossil fuels, are they going to sort of jump onto this, but in a more sort of capitalist way, and sort of say, well, actually, yeah, it is cheaper for us to give you this energy this way, but actually we're just going to charge you the same, if not more, for the pleasure, and we're going to pretend to be, kind of a good thing because it's green. I didn't know if that was something to be...
Okay, so that is about will the capital capture of green tech happen the same way that it has for AI? Is that a fair enough summation of your question? Michael, I've tried to cancel you for years and it hasn't worked. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, go on. I suppose on the left-right question, I mean, I used to be like activist first, journalist second, and I'm very much journalist first, not really activist at all now. And I find it quite liberating. But that's specific to my job, so that maybe there's not much that can be sort of generally drawn from that that's interesting to a wider audience than myself. I mean,
I love you. Like, I was going to talk about me, but now I'm not going to.
I mean, on the cancel culture issue, I think it was a real problem on the left. I mean, we're seeing it on the right now as well, aren't we, with Israel-Palestine and sort of it being weaponized. And I mean, I think actually that the left... Well, now it has been sort of weaponized by mainly the left against the right when it comes to, not cancellation in terms of losing a job, but cancellation in terms of sort of like social opprobrium. And actually, people did lose their jobs, actually, even on the right. That did happen. I don't think it was a big as deal as they made it out, but it did happen. Now it's happening to the left. I think people are going to probably get a bit more, actually, maybe Twitter mobs and this kind of thing, and sort of like losing sight of evidence and talking about subjective feelings. Subjective feelings matter, but they don't override facts. So I think cancel culture has peaked. I think that's happened. So I'm not that worried about it. On the Palestine question, I mean, it's interesting. Why is it a left-right issue? I mean, I think you can only support what Israel is doing if you fundamentally dehumanize people that aren't, their narrative isn't that they're Western. So I don't think you can support what Israel is doing without being quite comfortable with racism, to be honest, which is why I think the left has a much stronger position on it than anyone on the right. Even, sometimes you see people on the right with analysis that seems somewhat correct, but obviously, they're not that fussed because, quite rightly, one of the motivating sort of issues for the left is racism. And I think, it's clear that the only way you can be comfortable with what Israel is doing is if you are comfortable with racism, I think, frankly.
Moya, would you like to take the green tech question? Or the JSO expanding its struggle?
I could take both because I have a one-word answer for the JSO, which is yes. Yeah. And if you wanted me to give more words into that answer, yeah, of course you should link up protests because that's just what any movement does to grow. It's like link with these other causes. But I also think that what you do is very effective as it is. So bravo. In terms of green tech, I basically said it before, but if the green tech revolution happens under the current conditions, yeah, of course it will be captured by business. And that's, I think at the moment, that's the only way we're gonna see the green tech revolution. What was interesting about when Rishi Sunak rolled back on his climate pledges was you heard so much furore from business. You know, car makers, people who've been brought in to do all this tech, who prepared their companies. They're like, what the hell are you doing? You've told us we're going to do this green stuff. We've changed all our plans around this green stuff. We're ready to make a lot of money from green tech. And now you're taking that away from us. So you got this real pushback from the very big business that you might in the past have expected to be annoyed about it. The only businesses that were kind of like, it's fine. Where, you know, BP and the giant fossil fuel companies were like, great, let's push these back, baby. And the more you look at like the way the media talks about this is when they were discussing, you know, why it was bad that Rishi Sunak was pushing back the climate pledges, they were like, they use big business as this legitimizing thing. It's the same way when Liz Truss crashed the economy, we say it was the homeowners who got really mad. No, it was the markets, because the markets and big business who really are kind of like have the final say on what goes in this country. So the media, you know, you heard all the liberal podcasts, news agents and so on being like, and big business is really unhappy, which means it's bad. So in that's how we judge whether a green policy or a non-green policy is good or not. Is big business happy about it? Are they going to go along with it? Great, you know it's really bad. Do the markets like it? No. So okay, Liz Truss has to go.
Owen, you can respond to whatever question you like, but I would encourage you to keep it brief because that way I can take 3 more questions before we wrap up.
Yeah, just quickly, cancel culture. I mean, I think the reason, because, for example, lumping in, say, Palestine and, for example, trans rights, I mean, the difference there there's always been an assault on the left, an attempt to marginalise the left. You got it after the Russian Revolution, the first Red Scare, and then you got the second Red Scare, which is generally known as McCarthyism. So the left has always faced those sorts of attacks. But there's a difference just quickly on that, which is, for example, on trans rights, you have the government, the media, and those which are the main kind of institutions on these sorts of issues, and then you have a very marginalised minority and their disproportionately LGBTQ allies. On Palestine, you have the media and the government all on one side, and then you have a relatively marginalised movement which takes to the streets. I don't think there's a comparison. You know, when basically often this is cry bullying by those who are anti-trans, for example, who dominate public discussion on this issue because there are barely any trans people with a public platform anymore. And then they pretend they're being silenced as a means to shift the tables and present their actually very marginalised opponents as the real bullies. So I just think there's no comparison, that's all.
I want to take 3 more questions. I would love to hear from some ladies, please. Amazing. It's ladies' night. And we have right in the middle there, Kafia. And we've got, oh my God, we've got 2 right there in the corner. So we've got Kafia in the middle, and then we've got 2 in that corner over there. And then actually, just why not, blunt fringe, right in front of me. 4 questions. I'm sorry if it's a bit objectifying for me to refer to you this way, but in my experience, it's the way in which you get into like least trouble is when you go for hair and clothes. Although one time someone got upset because I spotted his Lacoste t-shirt from very far away and he thought that it made him seem shallow and frivolous. But he shouldn't have worn a Lacoste t-shirt where I could see it. Okay.
Hi, thanks. You're all legends, by the way. Don't let it go to your heads. I have been a Labour supporter all my adult life, a Labour campaigner, Labour voter. I don't think I've ever been this close to not voting for Labour at the next election. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the left leveraging their votes to ideally get Keir Starmer out or just to shift their positions from not being war crime supporters. That'd be great.
Owen said we need like a broader ranging socialist movement to overcome capitalism with regards to the climate crisis. What movements or groups does the panel identify right now as being promising in this regard? And if there aren't any, or even if there are, what aims would a hypothetical group like this have?
We've got right there. Did you have your hand up, or are you just helping your friend put her hand up early? Oh, just helping. Oh, that's fine. That is called solidarity. And blunt fringe.
Hello. It's not a particularly based question on today's topics, but I just kind of want to ask for Ash and Moya. I've always found it really difficult as a woman to properly articulate my thoughts and my opinions. and kind of been afraid to step on people's toes a lot of the time. And I was just wondering, as women and women of colour at that as well, how you found the confidence to step on the people's toes, and just been kind of, I feel like you guys are very articulate and you know what you're doing. And it sounds like, I'd like to know.
The secret is amphetamine.
I'd actually like to come in on that question.
Okay, so we've got how should left-wing people leverage their vote? We've got, are there any movements that you find promising? We've got, as ladies in the business, how do we do it? So I guess the questions which aren't gender specific, I'm going to let Owen and Michael take those. But also I know that you want to talk about leverage. So you start with leveraging and then we'll expand outwards.
All right. So I thought there was a really interesting question you asked, because what you're asking is something I'm grappling, which is morality versus strategy. And I don't have a specific answer for you, because based on my moral compass, I can't vote for Labour next year. But does that mean I'm shooting myself in the foot? Does that mean in the long term that I'm, sacrificing a say in the direction of that political party by not being in that political party anymore? Does that mean I'm actually undermining the long-term causes I care about, the opportunity to take advantage of it? It's a debate I have constantly with people around me, and why I feel like I can't really judge people for voting for Labour if they're able to articulate why it's important to their long-term strategy that they see. The question about leverage, though, is quite interesting, because it was something we touched upon a bit earlier. And, we said, how are we going to leverage left power? And it was specifically sort of within the parameters of Labour. But something that I don't think is talked about very much is the level of devolution that's going on in England, and the amount to which local governments is going to be of significance, even more significance, in the coming years. So Labour, since 2014, a lot more powers have been devolved around England, mostly in the north, but it's starting to happen in the south too. I think if the amount of devolution deals, there's 10 at the moment, there's about 5 more coming in, but if the amount of devolution deals come in next year that have been agreed this year, 51% of England will have a mayor for the first time. And Cornwall doesn't have a mayor, but they do have devolved powers, and there's like these 3 tiers of devolution. And what you're seeing with that is there's a whole thing that this guy called Tom Nairn talked about, which is the break of Britain. It's just when Britain got unhappy, they devolved a load of powers to try and keep the union together. I think we're now seeing that on a more local level within England, which is a lot of areas in England are very unhappy because of the amount of neglect they've undergone. So that's why all the devolution's been happening in the north first, and then they're moving it down. But Labour have said, as part of their, pitch for, but, Keir Starmer lies a lot, so do we know if he'll hold to it? But they said, we're going to devolve powers even more to towns and cities. And what you're starting to see on this local level is where Labour have upset the local population, or where the politicians are not representing the local population, there is a movement towards some independence. You see it, Jamie Driscoll's running for mayor. He was sacked from Labour. We will get the fruits of whether that's actually going to be a successful campaign, but you saw it when George Galloway ran as an independent or whatever. At that local level, there is more of a chance to leverage the left as these external candidates. You've got Lutfi Rahman as a local council leader in Tower Hamlets. Recently in Newham, there was a local councillor who was elected like 2 weeks ago as an independent after she'd resigned from Labour, and then there was a by-election or something, and she was re-elected. So at that local level, people are more willing, I think, to throw their vote behind independents, independents who could be promising real socialist agendas that they think will make a difference on the ground. Because whereas in a national general election, you have, I want this party in power, you see it in by-elections all the time. At a local level, when the stakes seem lower, people are actually willing to take a chance on the policies that really will make a difference to their lives. So I think the leveraging might come from this external movement of independents who might start standing in more devolved, first of all, combined mayoralties, but then down to the towns and cities levels if Labour do enact that policy that they're claiming to.
Owen, what movement or movements have been giving you hope recently? You look super bummed out right now, so I'm scared you're going to be like,
wasn't me going on devolution?
I love devolution. What are you talking about? Well, I just think, look, again, actually, if you think about the movement on the streets and cities of Palestine, I think it's quite interesting what's happened there, because that has partly emerged because Labour have been so shit on the issue, and therefore that there isn't a leadership there offering representation to what millions of people think, so it goes onto the streets. And what's happening to Keir Starmer, who is only going to win by default, there's no love for him, is that he's already being toxified amongst sections of natural Labour voters in a way that Tony Blair was only when he was Prime Minister over Iraq. So that's already happening. I mean, you do get at the moment, this kind of phenomenon you get in a crisis. For example, over COVID, you get the rally round the government effect. And at the moment, you've got a rally round the opposition effect because people are just so desperate to get rid of the Conservatives. But a movement like we see over Palestine shows already deep unease, I think, with, because all those people are natural Labour voters, and that's a huge chunk of people who they represent. And that gives me hope because the reason that I'm optimistic about a Labour government isn't because of anything Keir Starmer's going to do, but I think it's going to open up space because at the moment it's hard to mobilise often because people think, what's the point? You're not actually going to win any concessions from the Conservatives. But I think with a Labour government, people feel that they'll have more power and ability to win particular gains. And also on that, the only good, in terms of the trade unions, is the big thing which I would say is giving me hope as a movement in terms of the mass strikes. In the 90s, we didn't have someone like Mick Lynch emerging from these big struggles, who was a focal point already before Tony Blair came to power of opposition. And the only good thing, or one of the good things that remains in terms of Labour's policy office, so we'll see how much it's watered down, is to remove some of the anti-trade union laws. And the unions have made it such a red line that I think they will end up doing it. And that will give more space to the trade unions to organise. So I think, for me, I'm optimistic about the Labour movement, the trade unions. I'm optimistic about what Palestine as a movement says about what will happen in the Labour government. And I think there'll be much, much more space for movements to organise because people are too defeatist under Conservative government.
Michael, you can either respond to the question about what movement is giving you hope or how you find it as a woman of colour speaking up in the media.
I've actually devoted my life to uplifting the voices of... I'll be serious. Vote it. I just don't have very strong opinions about voting Labour. Like, I feel the thing that frustrates me is people who say sort of like, anyone who now votes Labour, you have sold your soul to the devil, or anyone who says, if you don't vote Labour, you are letting the Tories in the next... I feel like they're not trying hard enough for our votes, but also withholding your vote from the... I don't know how much it achieves. I think, I kind of agree with you that you just got to look at where you think you can have leverage. I mean, I think there are a lot of MPs who will personally be like quite worried about Palestine. I think that probably has meant some pressure has gone up there. I think the size of those demonstrations definitely did actually put a lot of pressure on Keir Starmer, and he did feel like, oh, this isn't just a minority concern of a few left-wingers who are angry at me. Like, I think he feels quite uncomfortable about some of the positions he's taken on Palestine. So I do think there are definitely ways that leverage can be had. I don't think there's this sort of one trick that's going to get Keir Starmer to be a better Prime Minister if, as he probably will, he becomes it. So yeah, I mean, I feel diversity of tactics on all of those things. Yeah, I mean, with you as well. I just don't have I feel it's up to you who you vote for this time around. Last time, you better goddamn vote for Labour. But this time, it's up to you guys.
I guess on the leverage question, I think you just have to be willing to lose. And that's what I've learned from 2016 onwards, which is the reason why the Conservative Party's done such a hardcore lurch to the right is because right-wing voters were willing to lend their votes to other parties, even if that meant a Labour candidate winning. So that was the UKIP strategy, that was the Brexit Party strategy. And the problem with lots of people who are left-wing and voting for the Labour Party is they go, I'm voting for you, but I'm not happy about it. Keir Starmer doesn't give a fuck. He doesn't give a fuck. You're still voting for him. And I understand that there is a moral dimension and a feeling of like, aren't I letting worse in? But the fact is that loyal voters don't get rewarded. And that has been my political lesson of the past 7 years.
I mean, isn't the problem the Green Party haven't really got their act together? I mean, I don't want to be... I mean,
I'll give those hippies my vote no matter what.
But I mean, the problem with them is not just that they need a charismatic leader. I think Ash should take over the Greens, personally. But also, as well as that, the problem we got the Greens is they keep trying to... They've got a strategy of hoovering up votes in conservative areas, because that's the reason. Because you can think at the moment, why aren't they just doing these big viral videos to Labour voters, your party's abandoned you, come home to us? They're not doing that because they're scared of saying they're left-wing because they're winning votes in really Tory areas. And that is a problem for us because it stops them being a left-wing version of UKIP.
That's fine. Those tofu munchers are my brethren. They're getting my vote no matter what next time.
Sounds so respectful.
I'm so respectful. Whatever. I'm like, I'll march with you. I'll buy a pair of Birkenstocks, whatever it takes. So I suppose on the last question, which is about finding a voice in the media, I'm totally going to abuse my position as chair because I'm speaking up as a woman to do it. So I never really wanted to do this job. It's not something which I envisaged for myself at all. I finished my master's and I thought that maybe I was going to go and do a PhD and work in the academy. And I was sort of kicking my heels and working in a pub, and I really just didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I knew that politics was really important to me, political activism was really important to me, but there wasn't like a job which I thought I could go out and do. Enter Aaron Bustani. So me and Aaron had been friends for years, and he wanted me to come on what was then Novara FM to talk about the uprisings in Baltimore. And I tried to drop out at the last minute because I felt really, really nervous and I just didn't want to do it. And the thought of sharing my opinion on the radio literally made me want to vomit, like physically vomit. And he just pulled like the Iranian uncle card and just didn't let me drop out, and guilted me until like I got my ass in that studio. And it all went from there. And I think that imposter syndrome is really healthy. And I think that doubt is really healthy. And I think that certainty, particularly in politics, can be really dangerous because it stops you listening and it stops you learning. And in my experience, one of the nicest things about Novara in a way is that I don't feel that anyone thought of themselves as being like opinion leaders in some way. It's a whole lot of people who kind of tripped up and fell into journalism somehow. And I think that that's why I like working with you all. It means that there is a level of doubt and questioning and skepticism that actually makes it a politically refreshing place to be. And so when it comes to going, how do I speak up when it feels really scary? I mean, the fact is that still in my personal life, I'm so conflict averse, it's crazy. Like, if I can feel an argument brewing, like, between me and my partner or me and my mum, I just sort of go dead like a fish, just sort of like hope that no one will notice me if I just stop moving and breathing, which is really different from how I conduct my political life. And the reason why I feel stronger in my political life is because it's a reflection of all of these political and professional relationships that I have here in this wonderful organisation, which leads me to go to novaramedia.com/support. And I'm only half joking because we didn't mean to do this. None of us thought, yeah, the thing I want to be is a journalist, and the thing that I really want to do is, you know, be just like Laura Kuenssberg or Robert Peston. None of us fucking wanted that. Like, we are all journalists against our will. And I think that that's important because it means that we look at media not as an opportunity for career advancement. I think that all of us, though there is pluralism and our visions of what it means to be left-wing, there's a lot of difference. We see changing the media as so essential to changing the politics that we've ended up with, because if politics is a reflection of class forces in society, so is media. And look at who the fuck is working in that. So we can't do any of this without your support. We literally can't. The majority of our funding comes from our supporters, and we're never, ever, ever going to put up a paywall. We just don't believe in it. So we want to keep making things free to access. We still want to put out stuff which can be accessible by anyone who needs it or could find some value from it. But in order to do that, we need you guys. So thank you for coming. Thank you to those of you who are our supporters. And thank you, of course, to our amazing panel. The bar is open, so please enjoy the rest of your evening.